we see the first early assertions of American identity. This is seen as a very important aspect of, or an important step in the creation of American national identity by British writers. Here, one of the most important elegies written in the American literature is
romance here is not Bollywood romance.
I'll tell you what I did to be successful, because with that experience, I know how we can make preparations for this.
Then we move on to the next important period. It's supposed to be the most important period. This is after America has gained its independence. This period is called American Romanticism or American Transcendentalism. As I was telling you a few minutes ago, the writers of this period were greatly influenced by the British Romantics. Therefore, some of the concepts that were important to the British Romantics, like for example, emotion, the focus on emotion, attaching importance to emotion, nature, individualism, supernatural. We see these concepts reflected in the writing of American Transcendentalists. And again, the privileging of intuition over reason. Of course, in England, this came about as a matter of a reaction against the Enlightenment philosophers or the Enlightenment philosophy, which dominated the intellectual mindsets of people in the late 17th and early 18th century, especially John Locke and Isaac Newton, their philosophies. But in America, more or less, we see that it was a kind of an imitation. So at this point, American writers are still in that imitation stage. But it is also important to note that this age marks the transition. This is when they've already got their independence. It has been more than 45 years since they've got their independence, 1776. America already has gotten its independence. And then there is this realization in American people, that they must now etch out or forge their own identity. They cannot their identity cannot be entwined with the identity of the British. You see, that is also a very important aspect of affirming one's independence. Once a nation becomes independent, then there is a realization in that nation, or the people of that nation, to forge an identity of their own and not let their identity be seen as an extension of the colonizer's identity. So therefore, this phase, though we see some imitation in some ways, yet we see there is a very strong sentiment or a movement towards of their own identity. Another important thing that needs to be kept in mind is when we discuss American Transcendentalism is this. Yes, American writers imitated or borrowed these concepts of emotion, emphasizing emotions, nature, individualism, supernatural, intuition, etc. from the British. But then America's transcendental writers had a very important role that the British Romantics did not have or did not perform. That is in forging their national identity. Some of the most important writers of this period, if you divide the period into Romanticism and Transcendentalism, most of the times they are seen as one and the same. Some of the important writers of this period are Washington Irving. I do not know if you read this short story, Rip Van Winkle. It used to be prescribed very, very often, especially in schools. That's the story of a man who goes to what is called as the mountains, falls asleep there and wakes up 20 years later. He has been asleep for 20 years. He comes back only to see everything changed. So this short story has been interpreted as the changes that came over in America. And then James Fenimore Cooper, said to be the first important American novelist, and his novel, the most famous novel, Last of Mohicans, written in 1862, is usually prescribed in courses on American literature. If you have a paper or a course on American literature, then chances are that you will find Fenimore Cooper's Last of the Mohicans on the reading list or in the syllabus. Then Edgar Allan Poe, often called as the first detective writer, rather, the one who inaugurated detective fiction. He was also a very well-known poet. His Raven is an extraordinarily powerful poem, something that is comparable to Coleridge's Christabel, the same kind of a supernatural idea of the supernatural we get in this poem, The Raven. Then The Telltale Heart is a short story. Murders in the Rue Morgue, 1841, said to be the first instance of detective fiction in America. Nathaniel Hawthorne's The Scarlet Letter, one of the iconic novels. Another, Herman Melville, Moby Dick, written 1851. Then Harriet Beecher Stowe, Uncle Tom's Cabin, 1852. Was in the next class, we will select a few great novels, American novels, and great plays, American plays, and discuss very briefly on them. Then you will see Hawthorne's Scarlet Letter and Herman Melville's Moby Dick are one of the greatest American novels. Again, in most American literature courses, you will see Scarlet Letter and Moby Dick being prescribed. Then Transcendentalism. Literary historians separate Romanticism and Transcendentalism. But most historians collapse the two and simply say Transcendental movement, Transcendentalism, and they include what we discussed just a few minutes ago, Romanticism also under Transcendentalism. Transcendentalism is perhaps more influenced by the British Romantics than Romanticism. So here we see the first early assertions of American identity. So you can see some of the important themes that occupied the writers of this period was a belief in self-reliance. With self-reliance comes the idea that you have to forge an identity of your own and not depend upon your colonizer's identity. So writers here, as you can see, imitated the British Romantics, especially in the kind of importance that was attached to nature and the natural world. So intuition and imagination were seen to be endowed with divinity. So they were seen as paths to spiritual truth, the deep respect for nature as a source of wisdom and moral guidance, something that we find in Wordsworth. So the most important writers associated with transcendental movement are W. Emerson or Ralph Waldo Emerson. His essays, Nature, Self-Reliance, American Scholar, especially American Scholar. This is seen as a very crucial text that laid down the template for American identity. So the American Scholar basically is also the American citizen. What exactly should Americans be insofar as their identity is concerned from the point of view of their identity? This is specified by Emerson, and this day this is seen as a very important aspect of or an important step in the creation of American identity, American national identity. Then Henry David Thoreau, Civil Disobedience. Interestingly, it is said that Mahatma Gandhi, when he started civil disobedience in the 1930s as a part of India's struggle for independence, Indian freedom movement, Gandhi was influenced by this text by Thoreau called Civil Disobedience that was written about 70-80 years earlier than those movements that are connected with Indian independence were held. Then another important text that he wrote was Walden, also has a subtitle or Life in the Woods. Thoreau's Walden is perhaps the most important work along with American Scholar and Whitman's Leaves of Grass of the Transcendental period. Thoreau conducts an experiment. It's also called as an experiment in living. Thoreau also called Walden an experiment in living. Gandhi was very highly influenced by Thoreau. Therefore, Gandhi called his autobiography an experiment with truth. Here, he was in a way adapting from Thoreau's book Walden, which had this my experiments in living. For 1 full year, Toru lives in the woods, in the forest, all by himself. The idea was this, that in order to live, how much money do you need? So it was one of the early reactions against materialism, mad pursuit of money and material pleasures and wealth. How much money do you need? Interestingly, Toru believed that all that you need to live for 52 weeks was not to work all the 52 weeks. If you work only for, say, 1 or 2 weeks, that's good enough. The money that you get working for 1 or 2 weeks would be good enough to live for 1 full year. Because he was talking about very simple kind of living. His experiences in that year of living in the woods, Walden is the name of the place where he lived for 1 year, is recorded in this book Walden. So in order to prove that it was not a fluke, Toru showed that it was perfectly possible to live forever and continued for another year. Initially, his project was to live for only 1 year, but he lived there for 2 years. Walt Whitman's, it is often said that Walt Whitman, throughout his career, wrote only 1 poem, and that is Leaves of Grass. In fact, it is a collection of poems. Over a period of time, Whitman, whatever new poems he wrote, he updated this Leaves of Grass, the collection. So initially, when he wrote, there were only a few poems. Then he added a few more. He then released a new edition of Leaves of Grass. So for his entire life, there's only 1 poem that he wrote, and that's Leaves of Grass. Some of the poems that usually are prescribed that we read are Song of Myself, When Lilacs Last in Doriad Bloomed, supposed to be an elegy for Abraham Lincoln. We were talking about elegies when we were discussing British literature, Romantic literature of the Romantic period, as well as Matthew Arnold's Thyrsis, Shelley's Adonais, then Milton's Lycidas, some of those important elegies written by British writers. Here, one of the most important elegies written in the American literature is Whitman's When Lilacs Last in Doriad Bloomed. Oh Captain, My Captain is also a poem, a short poem that is prescribed very, very frequently in our courses. This is also based on Lincoln. The captain that Whitman refers to is Abraham Lincoln. So this was written after the death of Abraham Lincoln. Then Emily Dickinson, several short poems. Most of our courses will have some poem or poems by Emily Dickinson. So these are the important transcendentalist writers.